In 1728, a Danish-born captain in the Russian Navy sailed through a narrow strait separating two continents and changed the map of the world forever. His name was Vitus Bering, and he'd already sacrificed everything to get there. Friends buried across thousands of miles of Siberia, supplies scattered across a frozen wilderness, a half-planet journey overland just to reach his starting point. Now, peering into fog so thick it swallowed the horizon, he was about to discover the passage that would crack open the North Pacific and reshape human geography. This is the story of two extraordinary expeditions, and the brutal human cost of one man's obsession to reveal what lay at the edge of the known world. Vitus Bering was baptized on the 5th of August, 1681, in the port town of Horsens, Denmark. His father was a customs inspector and churchwarden, his family comfortable enough that two of his elder half-brothers attended the University of Copenhagen. But young Vitus chose the sea. At 15, he signed on as a ship's boy, and between 1696 and 1704, he sailed to India and the Dutch East Indies, completed naval officer training in Amsterdam, and reportedly served on Danish whalers in the North Atlantic. He visited European colonies in the Caribbean and along North America's eastern seaboard. By the time he was 23, he had circled much of the known world, and yet the most extraordinary chapters of his life had not yet begun. In 1704, Bering enrolled in the rapidly expanding navy of Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. Under the guidance of Norwegian-born Admiral Cornelius Kreis, he received an officer's commission as a sub-lieutenant. He rose steadily through the ranks, reaching the rank of second captain by 1720. He commanded vessels on dangerous missions, including the transport of a ship from the Azov Sea in Russia's south to the Baltic in its north. He married Anna Christina Puls in 1713, and over the following 18 years they had 9 children, 4 of whom survived childhood. He was, by all appearances, a competent and respected officer, not a legend, not yet. The mechanism of exploration in the early 18th century was not the romantic solo venture of popular imagination. It was a vast, grinding logistical machine. When Tsar Peter, I ordered Bering on the 29th of December, 1724, to captain what would become known as the First Kamchatka Expedition, the mission's scope was staggering. Bering was to travel overland from St. Petersburg to the remote port of Okhotsk on Russia's eastern coast, thousands of miles across Siberian rivers, mountain passes, and frozen tundra, then cross by sea to the Kamchatka Peninsula, build ships there from scratch, and sail north to determine whether Asia and North America were connected by land. The Tsar's final written instructions, issued just before Peter died on the 28th of January, 1725, were clear. Keep the land on the left, sail north until the coast turns west, and confirm whether a sea passage existed between the two continents. The natural route to Kamchatka ran along tributaries of the Lena River, but the Treaty of Nerchinsk made that politically impossible. So Bering's party, including his hardened Danish-born Lieutenant Martin Spanberg and the well-educated but relatively inexperienced Russian naval instructor Alexei Kharikov, set out overland. The lieutenants earned annual salaries of around 180 rubles for the journey. Bering earned 480. The expedition carried tons of supplies across a continent, relying on rivers in summer and sleds in winter, building boats, losing horses, burying men. It was less an act of exploration and more an act of pure, grinding endurance. By 1728, Bering had reached the Kamchatka Peninsula. A ship, the St. Gabriel, had been constructed from local timber. That summer, Bering sailed north along the Asian coastline, keeping the land to his left exactly as instructed. On the 16th of August, 1728, the St. Gabriel passed through the narrow channel separating Asia from North America, the strait that would bear his name. He had done it. He had proven that the two continents were not connected. And yet, in the fog and ice, he never actually saw the American coast. He turned back. The mission was technically accomplished, but the proof felt incomplete. Critics back incensed. Petersburg were unconvinced. There were contradictions at the heart of Bering's story that his contemporaries never fully resolved. He was not promoted at the conclusion of the Great Northern War in 1721, while many of his peers advanced. The omission was so embarrassing that when his wife's younger sister married a rear admiral who had served far fewer years, Bering quietly retired to save face, securing a promotion to first captain on the way out, along with 2 months' pay. He then moved his family to Viborg to live with his wife's relatives. After 5 months of unemployment, keenly aware of his dependence, he reapplied to the Admiralty. He was accepted back the same day. There was something quietly desperate, quietly determined about the man, a navigator who kept returning to the ice because the alternative was obscurity. The Great Northern Expedition, launched in 1733, was the largest scientific expedition in history to that point. Bering commanded a fleet of ships and hundreds of men tasked with mapping the entire Arctic coast of Russia, and crucially, reaching the North American continent directly. After years of preparation, and the brutal overland journey repeated again, Bering and Kharikov finally set sail from Kamchatka in June 1741. They were separated almost immediately by a storm. Kharikov's ship reached the Alaskan coast first. Bering's vessel, the St. Peter, sighted the snow-capped peak of what is now known as Mount St. Elias on the 16th of July, 1741, the first confirmed European sighting of Alaska's mainland. The crew went ashore on Kayak Island, and the expedition's naturalist, Georg Wilhelm Steller, spent a frantic few hours collecting specimens, furious that 10 years of preparation had yielded less than a single afternoon of science. The return voyage was a catastrophe. Scurvy ravaged the crew. Bering himself, now 60 years old, was gravely ill. The St. Peter was wrecked on a small, desolate island in the Commander Islands chain in November 1741. The men built shelters from driftwood and wreckage. They survived on sea otters and seals. Bering never left that island. He died on the 19th of December, 1741, partially buried by sand that had drifted into his makeshift shelter, a detail so stark and lonely it has haunted historians ever since. The island now bears his name. What most people never hear is that the survivors of the St. Peter did not perish with their captain. 46 men rebuilt a smaller vessel from the wreckage of the original and sailed back to Kamchatka in 1742. They brought with them sea otter pelts of extraordinary quality, and that discovery ignited the Russian fur trade in the North Pacific, eventually drawing Russian colonizers all the way to Alaska and California. Bering's death, in a sense, opened a door he never lived to walk through. The deeper question Bering's story raises is one that echoes across the history of exploration. Who bears the cost of empire's curiosity? The men who rowed in freezing water, who died of scurvy in makeshift shelters, who crossed Siberia on foot for years, they were not conquerors. They were instruments. Peter the Great wanted to know where his empire ended. Bering spent the better part of 2 decades finding out, and died in the sand doing it. The strait that separates Asia from America by a mere 55 miles is not just a geographic feature. It is a monument to the distance between ambition and consequence. Today, the Bering Strait sits at the center of some of the most urgent conversations on Earth. Climate change is melting the Arctic ice that once made these waters nearly impassable, opening new shipping lanes and rekindling geopolitical competition between Russia and the United States across the very water Bering charted. The Bering Land Bridge, which once connected the two continents and allowed the ancestors of indigenous Americans to migrate south, is a subject of intense archaeological study. The Strait Bering confirmed is now a potential corridor for the 21st century's new great game. There are proposals, some serious, some visionary, for a tunnel or bridge across the Bering Strait, connecting the road networks of Asia and North America. Whether or not such a structure is ever built, the idea itself reveals something enduring: the human compulsion to close the gaps, to connect what is separated, to know what lies on the other side of the fog. Vitus Bering sailed into that fog in a hand-built ship, with a crew of desperate men and an emperor's orders folded in his coat. He found the edge of the world, and the world has never been the same.